Story 1. The Clock That Counts Down. Do you hear the rain tonight? Good. That means you're in the right place. Because this story only happens when the rain falls steady. When the sound is just enough to blur the edges between here and there. Before I begin, do me a favor. Look at your walls, your shelves, your nightstand. Is there a clock in the room with you right now? Not digital, analog, ticking. Can you hear it? And more importantly, is it counting the right way? This story is about a man named Julian. He wasn't superstitious, didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He was a collector of antiques, an old soul, the kind of person who wandered estate sales not looking for deals, but for stories. Old things fascinated him. He believed objects held echoes of the people who used them, a kind of energy, memory and matter. He didn't believe they could hurt you, until the day he found the clock. It was tucked in the back corner of a dusty antique store in Rhode Island, a place that smelled of mold and mothballs. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, but then he saw it, a small wall-mounted wooden clock, dark cherry wood, gold hands, the numbers carved, not printed. But the strange thing, there were no hour markings, just a single dial, a hand that ticked slowly, backward. He thought it was a novelty. Asked the old woman behind the counter how it worked. She stared at him for a moment too long. "It doesn't tell time," she said. "It tells how much you've left." He laughed. She didn't. Still, the price was too good. He bought it, brought it home, hung it above the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom. It ticked softly, one click every second. But instead of moving clockwise, it turned against the grain, counterclockwise, smooth, unbothered. That night, he dreamed, he was standing in his hallway, the clock ticking above him. But the hands moved faster, spinning in reverse. And beneath it was a door that didn't exist in his real home. A black door, no handle, just the ticking and whispers behind it. He woke up gasping. The clock was still ticking. He tried to forget the dream, but it repeated, night after night. Same hallway, same black door. Only now, he could hear the whispers more clearly. They said, "Soon." He told himself it was stress. Work had been difficult. He was drinking too much coffee. He was dreaming, and dreams aren't real. But then, things started changing. First, the hallway got colder, even with the heater on. A draft he couldn't find, a chill that clung to his bones. Then, he noticed the clock's hand ticking faster, at first imperceptibly. But one night, he timed it. It ticked twice per second, and every time he blinked, it seemed just a bit further along than it should have been. He tried removing it from the wall, but the nails wouldn't budge. The wood behind it cracked, splintered, like it was growing into the house. He covered it with a towel. The next morning, the towel was gone, and the clock's hand was now at the halfway point. He remembered the woman's words. "It tells how much you have left." He checked his health, went to a doctor. Everything was fine, but he didn't feel fine. He started to forget things. Small at first. Names, dates, keys, then bigger. He forgot how to get to work, forgot his landlord's name, forgot why he'd even bought the clock in the first place. And still, it ticked, backward, faster, and the dreams became waking visions. He saw the black door now, not only in dreams, but reflected in windows, in mirrors, in puddles when it rained. And the whispers, they weren't behind the door anymore. They were in the walls, calling his name. One night, He came home and found the hallway different, longer, 3 more steps than usual, and at the end, the black door was there, real, solid, standing where his bathroom used to be. He called the police. They came, walked the hallway, saw only the wall, no door, but Julian saw it, plain as day. The officers left muttering about sleep deprivation. Julian didn't sleep that night. He watched the clock. It was spinning now, too fast to follow. And at midnight, it stopped. The hand pointed straight up, and the door opened. Inside was nothing. A void. Black. Still, but not empty. He could feel something in it. Waiting. He ran. Spent the night in his car. Came back the next morning. The door was gone. But the clock was ticking again. Backwards. From the start. As if it had chosen someone else now. Julian gave the clock away to a local thrift shop. Burned the wall where the door had appeared. Moved states. Started over. But the dreams followed. He still sees the hallway, the door, the whispers, and sometimes when he passes an old building, he hears ticking and sees someone else staring at a wall as a black door slowly appears. Story 2. The photo album that wasn't empty. Do you remember what your childhood face looked like? Not from a mirror, not from memory, but from a photograph. One of those old, glossy ones you'd find buried in a shoebox in the attic. Maybe stuck to another photo in the corner from years of heat. Now, imagine finding an album filled with your photos, only you don't remember any of them. The places, the people around you, the clothes you're wearing. They all feel just slightly off, like a dream you can't explain but recognize in your bones. What would you do if the album kept updating itself with new photos of your future? Photos that haven't happened yet. This story is about a woman named Miriam, 54 years old, retired school librarian, lived alone in a house on the outskirts of a small town in Oregon. She liked the quiet, liked old novels, hot tea, the sound of wind rustling leaves at night. After her mother passed away, she inherited the family home, a place she hadn't set foot in for nearly 30 years. The house was ordinary in most ways. Faded blue paint, creaky floorboards, too many closets. It sat on a hill just high enough that on foggy mornings, it looked like it was floating. She moved in on a Tuesday. The first few days were peaceful. She dusted off the furniture, sorted her mother's dishes, and started reading again in the front room with the big window that faced the pine-covered valley below. But then in the attic, behind a false panel in the far corner, she found a leather-bound photo album. There was no title, no dust on it, like someone had just placed it there. Curious, she brought it downstairs. The cover was smooth, untouched by time. The clasp opened easily, and inside were photographs of her. Miriam, as a child, maybe 5, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of a white farmhouse she didn't recognize, wearing clothes she never remembered owning. In the next photo, she was inside a kitchen, also unfamiliar, looking up at a man whose face was blurred, but whose hand rested gently on her shoulder. She flipped faster. Dozens of photos. All of her. A few alone. Many with blurred figures. One with a woman holding her hand. But the woman's body was transparent, as if caught in the middle of disappearing. The rooms, the furniture, the places, none of them matched her childhood. But she was there, looking into the camera, smiling, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She closed the book, hands trembling. She didn't sleep that night. The morning after Miriam found the album, She sat at her kitchen table with the book closed in front of her, a cup of tea growing cold in her hand. Rain tapped gently on the windows. The sound was familiar, comforting, until she realized she couldn't remember when it started. She opened the album again. The photographs were the same. For a moment, she felt relief. Maybe it was just some strange trick of the past. Maybe her mother had taken these photos, and she had simply forgotten. Memories from early childhood often blur, right? But then she reached the final photo she'd seen the night before. Her, sitting in a chair in a room she didn't recognize, staring directly at the camera, and noticed something impossible. There was now another photo after it. She hadn't seen this one yesterday. In the new photo, she stood at her front window, the one facing the valley, wearing the exact robe and slippers she had on right now. Her breath caught. She looked up. The window was in front of her. She stood slowly, moved toward it, afraid of what she might see outside. Nothing, just fog, trees, the distant power lines barely visible through the gray mist. She returned to the table. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. Another photo had appeared. She was asleep in bed, the lamp beside her glowing faintly, mouth slightly open, blanket pulled to her chest. She flipped again. There was a photo of her in the kitchen, making tea. She hadn't done that yet today. She turned her head toward the kettle, which sat cold and empty. She hadn't even filled it. The photo showed it steaming. For the next hour, she sat frozen. The rain continued, steady as breath. When she finally stood, she placed the album back in a drawer and told herself something she didn't quite believe. It's a prank, or a glitch. I'm tired. That's all. She filled the kettle, made tea, stared at the cabinet where the album now rested behind 2 dish towels. Didn't touch it for the rest of the day. But that night, she had a dream. She was in the hallway of a house that felt familiar, but wasn't hers. There were no light fixtures, only a thin gray glow leaking in from beneath a door at the far end. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. The walls whispered. She couldn't make out words, only a rhythm that sounded too much like her own name. When she reached the door, she tried to open it, but it didn't budge. Instead, it clicked open on its own. Just a crack. Enough for her to see a room full of shelves. And on the shelves, albums. Hundreds, maybe thousands. All identical to the one she had found. Some open, some closed. Some with names on the covers. Her name. Then she heard something behind her. A sound like the turning of a page. She spun around and woke up. The rain hadn't stopped. Over the next several days, the album added more photos. She didn't take them. No one did. There was no camera in the house. Yet the photos continued to appear. Always one at a time. Always at night. Always showing things that hadn't happened yet, but would. Always showing her. Eating. Sleeping. Washing dishes. Reading in the front room. Staring out windows. Then one day, a photo appeared that froze her in place. It showed her dead. She was in the kitchen, collapsed at the table, eyes open, mouth agape. The window behind her glowed with morning light. She wore her favorite gray cardigan, the one she hadn't worn in weeks. The photo was crisp, clean, clear, no blur, no doubt. She slammed the album shut and shoved it back into the drawer. She spent the next 3 days without looking at it. Barely ate, barely slept. Every creak in the floor felt like a warning. Every shadow on the wall looked like the silhouette of something about to happen. And every night, she dreamed of the door. It was always there at the end of the hallway, always opening just a bit more, always revealing a few more albums on the shelves. One night, she saw a woman inside. Not just any woman, herself, sitting at a table, flipping through an album, except the woman looked older, thinner, hollow, and when she looked up from the pages, her eyes were completely white. On the fourth morning since the last new photo appeared, Miriam opened the drawer out of instinct, almost expecting the album to be gone. It wasn't. It was exactly where she left it, beneath the dish towels, sitting in the dark, quiet and still. But when she touched it, it was warm, as if someone had just been holding it. Her hand recoiled, her breath caught. She didn't want to look inside, but she couldn't stop herself. She pulled the album out and unclasped it, and there it was, a new photo. She stood in the attic, covered in dust, looking down at something in her hands, something she couldn't make out clearly. Her expression was blank, not sad, not scared, just resigned. She had not been in the attic since the day she found the book. She didn't want to go back, but the photo was dated. Tomorrow. It was the first time a photo had a written date. March 16th, 3:12 p.m. And the more she stared at the photo, the more she noticed. Behind her, in the shadows of the attic, stood another figure, barely visible, tall, thin, faceless. She shut the album and stood from the table so fast her chair tipped over. She didn't pick it up. That day, she drove into town, tried to act normal, bought groceries she didn't need, talked to the cashier too long, stared at people's faces like she hadn't seen another soul in weeks. Maybe she hadn't really. Maybe she was already slipping. She walked past the antique shop at the edge of Main Street and paused. There, in the window, was an album, identical to hers, black leather, no title, gold clasp. Her heart thudded. She stepped inside. The shop was dim and silent, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural. No clerk, no music, no other customers. She approached the album in the display. Before she could touch it, a voice came from the back. "Looking for yourself?" A woman stepped out of the shadows. Her eyes were milky white. I have one of these," Miriam said. The woman nodded slowly. "Most do, only some know it." "What is it?" The woman tilted her head. "A map, a cage, a mirror, depends on who you ask." Miriam opened the album on the table. The pages were blank, except for one, a single photograph. Miriam, standing in her kitchen, holding the album, looking out the shop window. Right now, she looked up, but the window was dark. Rain poured hard, blurring the street outside. She looked back at the woman, but she was gone. The shop was empty. The door behind her was open. A bell rang that she hadn't heard when she entered. She backed out slowly, didn't take the album, didn't say another word, just got in her car and drove. That night, she didn't sleep. She placed the album on the floor beside her bed and stared at the ceiling, listened to the storm, heard things in it that didn't belong to wind or water, a soft dragging sound, like feet sliding across the floorboards, a whisper of her name, not from inside her mind, but from somewhere just outside her window. She didn't move, didn't breathe, until morning came, and the clock struck 3 p.m. At 3:06 p.m., Miriam stood at the bottom of the attic stairs. Her hands were shaking, her pulse beat behind her eyes. She held the album in her arms like a shield, her fingers clutching the spine until her knuckles turned white. The storm outside had picked up. Rain slammed the roof. Wind pressed against the walls like something trying to get in, or maybe something trying to keep her inside. She took the first step. The wood groaned beneath her weight. Each creak echoed louder than the last. When she reached the top, she paused. The air was still and dry. No draft, no sound, as if the attic had been waiting with held breath. The light bulb above her head buzzed softly, then flickered out. Darkness. She clicked her flashlight on. The beam sliced across stacks of boxes, draped furniture, old books and photo frames turned inward to face the wall. Her eyes moved to the far corner, the space where she had first found the album. Empty, but the dust was disturbed. Footprints leading toward her, then vanishing. She turned slowly, her breath fogging in front of her. Something had changed. The attic felt larger than before, deeper, like the walls had pulled back. And then she saw it. At the far side of the attic, where there had once been nothing but insulation and a sloped roof, now stood a door. Black, wooden, tall, with no handle. Only a circular symbol carved at eye level. 12 notches around the edge. 11 worn with time. The 12th freshly gouged. She knew this door. She had seen it in her dreams. She stepped forward, slowly. Each breath felt heavier. When she stood before the door, she lifted the album. It vibrated faintly in her hands. She opened it. One photo. Her, standing before the door, flashlight in hand, mouth slightly open in shock. Now, the photo had been taken now, and just below the image, written in small, elegant handwriting, turn the page. Her fingers trembled. She turned the page. The next photo showed the door open. Inside, blackness. Depth, no floor, no walls. And her, stepping inside. Behind her, in the photo, a figure loomed tall, blurred, with hands that reached toward her back. Miriam shut the book. No. She stepped back. The floor creaked beneath her. The door stayed shut, but the air behind her changed. She turned. A shadow stood between her and the attic stairs. Not a person. A shape. It didn't move. Didn't speak. It just watched. Miriam lifted the album like a weapon. I didn't ask for this, she said, voice shaking. I don't want this. The figure tilted its head. Then it stepped aside, silently, as if granting her a choice. Behind it, the staircase remained, the way back, but her eyes drifted again to the door. Her breath slowed, and deep inside her mind a memory surfaced. A room, a camera, a voice that whispered, "We choose the ones who will remember. We choose the keepers." She dropped the album. It hit the floor with a sound like thunder. The door opened. Miriam stood frozen. The door had opened on its own. No creak, no dramatic burst. Just a quiet, effortless parting of something that had never been meant to open again. The inside was not black, not entirely. It was the color of forgiveness, of rot and dust and things buried under time. And in the center of it all, floating as if caught in still water, hung an album, identical to hers, but larger, thicker. Its pages fluttered as if breathing. She stepped forward. Her hand reached for the doorframe, but it burned at her touch, not with heat, but with memory. She remembered being a child. She remembered standing in a room filled with light that hummed like old film, and someone, not her mother, had told her, if you open the wrong book, you don't get to close it. Tears blurred her vision. She stepped across the threshold. The moment her foot landed on the other side, the attic behind her was gone. Now there was only this space. Infinite, quiet, Alive, she approached the floating album. It pulsed with each of her heartbeats. When she reached out to touch it, a voice, faint, cold, right behind her ear whispered, "Take your place." And the album opened. Pages flipped rapidly, faster than she could follow. Each one showed versions of her. Some she recognized, real memories. Others were possibilities, roads not taken. One page showed her pregnant, sitting beside a man she had never met. Another showed her drowning. Another, old and alone in a room filled with clocks. Another showed her exactly as she was now. She screamed, backed away. "No, I don't belong here." The pages stopped flipping, and the book spoke, not aloud, but inside her. Then who does? She looked down at her hands. They were fading, not disappearing, but becoming translucent, as if her story was being unwritten. The book waited. She turned. Behind her, a hallway had formed, endless, lined with thousands of bookshelves. Each shelf held photo albums, and on the spines, names, some familiar, some impossible. She moved down the hall, found an album with her mother's name, opened it. Inside, photos she had never seen. Her mother as a girl, a teenager, a young woman, smiling, crying, screaming, standing before the same black door. And then, in the last photo, holding Miriam as a baby, just outside the attic. In her arms, the album. Miriam closed the book slowly. She now understood. This place wasn't a trap. It was an archive, a repository for lives that were marked by grief, by memory, by a question never answered. She heard footsteps behind her, turned. A figure approached. It was a woman from the antique store, but younger, eyes still white, but glowing faintly now. "You remembered," the woman said. Miriam nodded. "I don't want to." The woman held out her hand. "You don't have to stay, but the book will, and it needs a guardian." Miriam looked back at her own album, now resting gently on a pedestal of unseen material. Closed, waiting. She didn't speak. She just stepped forward and placed her hand on the cover. It pulsed once, then was still. She woke up in her bed. Sunlight leaked through the curtains. Birds chirped faintly outside. The rain had stopped. She sat up slowly, felt the ache of something having passed through her. On her nightstand sat a new book, smaller, leather-bound, no photos inside, just blank pages. And on the first page, handwritten in the same small, elegant script as before. This time, you choose what gets remembered. And ever since that day, whenever someone new moves into that house on the hill, they sometimes hear a faint clicking sound above the ceiling, like pages turning, like photographs being placed carefully between paper and silence. And once, just once, a boy found an old photo album in the attic. He said it was empty, but his mother remembers him talking in his sleep that night. He whispered, "Don't forget me." Story 3. The calls always come from the basement. Do you hear that? Not the rain. That's always there. Listen beneath it. Lower. The sound behind the sound. The ringing. Old-fashioned. Shrill. Hollow. Like something calling through time instead of wires. This story begins with a man named Caleb. He wasn't the kind of person who scared easily. Not because he was brave, but because he didn't have time for fear. Divorced. 43. Worked construction during the day. Drank too much at night. His dog, Murphy, was the only constant in his life. A tired old black lab with cloudy eyes and a limp from a fall years ago. When his father died, Caleb inherited the house. It sat on a quiet road at the edge of a dying town in Michigan. Red bricks, moss on the shingles, and a basement that always smelled like wet concrete and rust. He didn't want the house, but it was free and he was broke, so he moved in. The first few days were uneventful. The house creaked like old houses do. The pipes moaned when the water ran. The basement door stuck when the weather turned humid. Nothing out of the ordinary until the phone rang. It was a Tuesday night. He had just finished dinner, steak and a warm can of beer, when Murphy began to growl. Not bark, growl, low and long, staring at the basement door. Caleb followed his gaze. Then he heard it ring, not from his cell, not from the landline upstairs, which he had disconnected years ago. It came from below. He opened the basement door. Darkness. And from somewhere down in that black cement belly of the house, ring. Oh, echoing. Mechanical. The kind of ring you don't hear anymore. He grabbed a flashlight. Stay, he told Murphy. The dog didn't argue. Step by step, he descended the stairs. The air was damp. The temperature dropped with each footfall. At the bottom, he swept the light across the room. Exposed pipes, a water heater, boxes, paint cans, and in the far corner, a small wooden table. On it, covered in a thin sheet of dust, a rotary phone, black, glossy, untouched. It rang again. Ring. He stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't speak. After the fourth ring, it stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. He approached slowly, shining the light over the phone's base. No cord, no power line, nothing, just the phone. He left it there, went back upstairs, didn't sleep. The next morning it was still there, silent. That night it rang again. This time he picked it up. His hand shook as he brought it to his ear. Static, then breathing. His own, not just similar, identical. He said, "Hello?" And the voice on the other end whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." He slammed the receiver down, ran upstairs, locked the basement door. The next day, he told himself it was a prank, maybe some radio interference, some kind of feedback. He Googled rotary phones, interference, audio hallucinations. Nothing explained it. The third night, it rang at 3:12 a.m. When he answered, the voice was louder, and it said, "I know what you did." After the third call, Caleb unplugged the lamp in the basement and smashed it against the wall. The phone didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even shift on the table. It just sat there, waiting. He went upstairs and shoved the door shut, sliding a chair under the knob. But even then he couldn't rest. His ears were too tuned now. Every creak in the floor became a whisper. Every gust of wind in the vents felt like breath down his neck. Every silence dragged with weight, like something holding its breath just out of sight. He stayed awake the entire night, eyes on the door, Murphy pressed against his leg. The next morning, he tried to explain it away. Sleep deprivation, stress, isolation. Maybe he'd never noticed the phone before. Maybe his father had put it there. Maybe he had forgotten. But when he called his sister, Allison, to ask if she remembered phoning the basement, her voice went cold. No, Dad didn't like phones. What do you mean? She hesitated. He said they carried voices that didn't belong to us. Caleb almost dropped the receiver. She continued. Sometimes I heard him talking down there, but there was no one else in the house. I thought he was losing it. He didn't tell her what he heard. He didn't tell anyone. That night, it rang again, 3:12 a.m., as if on schedule. He let it ring 6 times before answering. Hello. The static was louder now, sharper, almost painful. Then the voice spoke. Not a whisper this time. Clear, still his own voice, but older, angrier. You think you buried it, but it's not done with you. He shouted into the receiver. What do you want from me? No answer, only breathing. Then, check the floor. The line went dead. He stood in the basement, hours later, barefoot, flashlight in hand, staring at the concrete floor beneath the table. It looked normal, but that word meant nothing anymore. He got a hammer and a chisel, chipped slowly. Hours passed, until he found what beneath the concrete, a trapdoor, old, warped, locked. He broke it open. The smell that escaped was not of this world. Rot, mold, and something else. Something like old film vinegar, metal, and sorrow. He opened it fully. Stairs descended into darkness. And at the bottom, he saw it. A second phone. Identical. But this one was ringing already. And the voice it carried wasn't his. The stairs beneath the trapdoor didn't belong to the house. Caleb knew at the moment his foot touched the first step. The wood was too dry, the grain too straight. The air shifted, denser, somehow like descending underwater. The flashlight dimmed the further down he went, even with new batteries. Murphy didn't follow. He stood at the top of the basement steps, whining. Caleb descended anyway. 13 steps. No more, no less. At the bottom was a room. It had no walls. At least none that he could see. Only dark. And in the middle, lit by a cold blue glow, stood the second phone. Identical, but this one was off the hook. The receiver dangled, swaying slightly. He stepped forward. No sound. No echo of footsteps, as if the space swallowed everything but the ring. He picked it up. No static, just silence. Then breathing, but not like before. Not his own. This breath was labored, strained, pain. And then the voice spoke. Female, shaking. Caleb, it hurts. He froze. Who is this? I waited. What are you talking about? You left me? His chest tightened. Left who? You were supposed to come back. You promised. The voice cracked. Cried. You said you'd be quick. The room seemed to close in around him. And then he remembered. He was 8. The woods behind the house. A game of hide and seek. And Lily, his cousin, smaller than him, always trying to keep up. He had told her to hide. Don't come out until I find you, he'd said. But he never did. He forgot. He went inside. Dinner. Bed. No one asked where Lily was. In the morning, the police were called. They searched for days. Found nothing. His parents told him not to blame himself. But that day in the woods, he had known where she was hiding. He just never said it. He dropped the phone. It didn't hit the floor. It just vanished midair. The light in the room dimmed. And then, from the dark, footsteps, child-sized, slow, scraping the floor. He turned and ran. Up the stairs. Into the basement. Slammed the trapdoor shut. Nailed it. Moved furniture on top of it. That night, the first phone rang again. 3:12 a.m. This time, he didn't answer. He unplugged the flashlight. Sat in the dark with Murphy at his side, shaking. The phone rang for 7 minutes. Then silence. He checked the basement the next day. The trapdoor was gone, but the table had 2 phones on it now, both off the hook. After the second phone appeared on the table, Caleb stopped going into the basement. He locked the door, piled furniture against it, slept with Murphy curled at his feet, and a loaded shotgun beside the bed. But it didn't matter, because the phones didn't need the basement anymore. The ringing followed him. He began hearing it in the walls, in the plumbing, in the silence between heartbeats. Not loud, insistent, always the same tone. Mechanical, cold, unforgiving. One night, the TV turned on by itself, flickered between static and snowy images of the woods behind the house, the same place where Lily had disappeared. Caleb stood frozen, holding the remote in his hand, knowing he hadn't pressed anything. And then the screen went black. A reflection stared back at him. Not his. Clothes, but not right. Younger, wide-eyed, lips slowly forming a word. Liar. The power went out. That same night, Murphy vanished. No open doors. No broken windows. Just a faint trail of wet paw prints leading to the basement door. They ended there. The phones rang for an hour. Caleb screamed, cried, begged. No one answered until they did. 3:12 a.m. Again, he answered on the first ring. The voice on the line was soft, gentle. Do you want him back? His mouth went dry. Yes. You know what you have to give. I don't understand. Yes, the voice said. You do. And then, as if the line shifted hands, another voice took over. Feminine, small, tired. Caleb, I'm cold. Lily, I was so scared. I waited so long. He collapsed to his knees. Phone pressed his face. I'm sorry. I was a kid. I didn't mean to. You forgot me. I didn't. I swear. You forgot my face. He couldn't respond, because it was true. He couldn't remember her face. Not fully. Not anymore. Only the guilt. And then the voice said, come downstairs. The line went dead. He didn't want to go, but he couldn't stop himself. Like something pulled at his spine. The hallway lights flickered as he passed. The basement door opened before he touched it. The stairs no longer creaked. And when he reached the bottom, the table was gone. So were the phones. In their place was a mirror. Tall, dirty, old. He stepped toward it, saw himself, but younger, different, wearing muddy clothes, leaves in his hair, the woods behind him. The boy in the mirror turned, held out his hand, and Caleb felt himself accepting it. He woke up on the floor, daylight pouring in from the basement window. Silence. He climbed the stairs. The living room was empty, cold, still. Murphy lay by the door, alive, sleeping. The phones were gone. No more ringing. For a week, things were normal, peaceful. He walked the woods behind the house, planted flowers by an old tree stump where he thought she might have hidden, spoke her name aloud. I remember now. And for the first time in years, he slept through the night until one morning a package arrived. No sender, just his name. Inside, a rotary phone. No cord, no base, just the receiver. And taped to the side, a note in childlike handwriting. For when you forget again. For days, Caleb didn't touch the phone that came in the package. He kept it in the garage, wrapped in towels, hidden inside a locked toolbox beneath a crate of old tools. But it didn't matter, because every night at 3:12 a.m., he heard it. Not a ring. Not anymore. Just a click. Like someone lifting a receiver on the other end. Like someone already there. Waiting. The first time he heard the click, he stayed in bed, eyes shut, pretending he hadn't. But the next night, the click came again. Then a whisper. No words. Just breath. Right beside his ear. Murphy whined in his sleep. The lights flickered. And the phone, though sealed away, vibrated softly in its metal box. By the third night, the whisper had found its voice again. Do you still remember me? He answered the darkness. Yes. The voice smiled through the air. Then it's time. He retrieved the phone, unwrapped it. Its surface was cold, but dry. The plastic had aged into a dull gray, but the receiver felt new, too clean. He set it on the table, sat down, watched it, and waited. At 3:12, the click came. Then the line hummed. He picked it up, didn't speak. The voice came through. Not Lily this time. Not even his own. A new voice. One he had never heard before. Neutral. Calm. Patient. You carried it longer than most. What is this? Caleb asked. What do you want? You were chosen when you forgot. Forgot what? Her. Yourself. The truth. He swallowed hard. His hands trembled. I remember now. I do. The voice was silent for a moment, then said, Would you like to stop remembering? He froze, his eyes stung with tears. The weight of everything he had felt, guilt, grief, fear, threatened to crack him in half. He asked, what would it cost? The voice whispered, nothing, except the last thing you kept for yourself. He didn't ask what that meant, because he knew his face, his name, his final tether to this world. He closed his eyes, held the receiver tightly, and said, yes. The next morning, a neighbor noticed the front door to the old brick house was wide open. She called the police. They found no one inside. No signs of struggle. No blood. No broken glass. Only a single object sitting neatly in the center of the living room floor. A rotary phone, disconnected, and beside it a photograph, black and white, of a small boy standing at the edge of the woods. No name on the back, no timestamp, just a single phrase written in perfect script. If found, do not answer. Story 4, The Mirror in Room 217. Before we begin, I want you to try something. If you're near a mirror right now, just glance at it. Don't stare too long. Don't study your face. Just look and then look away. Because if you linger, you might start to notice things that weren't there before. A flicker behind your eyes. A breath that isn't yours. Or worse, your reflection blinking after you already have. This story begins in a place many people have visited. A roadside motel. You know the kind. 2 floors. Plastic key cards. Curtains that never fully close. Air conditioner always too loud. Parking lot lit by flickering yellow lights. This particular motel was in New Mexico. Isolated. 5 miles off the nearest town. Barely visible from the highway. A woman named Ava checked into room 217. She was traveling alone. Cross country. Just a backpack, a few $100, and a car that was running out of faith. She wasn't running from something. Not exactly. But she didn't know what she was running to either. That night, it started raining. Hard. So she stayed in, ate crackers, drank from the sink, watched static on the TV for a while. Eventually gave up and decided to sleep. That's when she saw it. The mirror, it hung in the far corner of the room, near the closet. She hadn't noticed it earlier. It was large, oval, framed in brass that had darkened with age. No smudges, no cracks, but the reflection was off, just slightly. The angle wasn't right. It caught more of the bed than it should have. And when she moved to the left, her reflection moved slower than she did. She blinked. Her reflection blinked twice. She laughed, shook her head. Sleep deprived, she muttered. But when she turned off the light, she saw something that drained all the warmth from her chest. In the darkness, the mirror glowed faintly, not a reflection, a soft silver shimmer that pulsed like breath. She turned the light back on. It stopped. She walked up to it, stared into the glass. Her own face looked back at her, but it didn't feel like her. There was something behind her eyes, like the reflection was waiting for her to leave. Ava didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the mirror watching her, not from across the room, but from somewhere closer, as if her mind couldn't quite draw the line between her body and the reflection anymore. By 4 a.m., she got out of bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the glass. The rain had softened, but the wind howled. She turned the light off. The mirror glowed again. She turned the light on. It stopped. She repeated the process 5 times. Each time, the glow was brighter. Each time, the reflection took longer to appear, as if it were slowly waking up. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, just her own face, with an expression she wasn't making. Eyes slightly wider, mouth more relaxed, like someone trying to mimic her from memory, but missing by a fraction. She moved closer. So did the reflection, but not perfectly in sync. Ava raised her left hand. The reflection raised its right. She tilted her head. It didn't. She stood perfectly still, held her breath, and watched her reflection keep breathing. She left the room at sunrise, packed her things without looking back. The motel clerk didn't ask questions, but as she returned her key, he looked at her a moment too long. "You were in 217, right?" he asked. "Yeah." He hesitated, then said, "That room, the mirror is not supposed to be there. Wasn't there last month, and we didn't install anything." She blinked. "Then where did it come from?" He shrugged. "It shows up sometimes. Always in 217. Never the same shape. Sometimes it's broken, sometimes not." She stared at him, searching for a hint of humor. There was none. "I'd pick another room next time," he said, then went back to his paperwork. Ava drove 3 towns east, booked a room in a new motel, triple-checked for mirrors. There was only one in the bathroom, small, cracked, normal. She tried to relax, tried to sleep, but at exactly 3:12 a.m., she woke up. Something cold brushed her cheek. She sat up. The room was dark, and on the desk across from the bed was a mirror, oval, brass-framed, just like the one from 217. She hadn't brought it. She hadn't seen it when she checked in, but it was there, and in the reflection, she wasn't alone. Ava stared at the mirror on the desk. It hadn't been there when she checked in. She was sure of it. The motel room was plain: bed, desk, small TV, one painting of a mountain. The only mirror had been the small one in the bathroom. Now that mirror was here, oval, brass framed, exactly like the one from room 217. But this one was different in one small, sickening way. It didn't reflect her room. The walls behind her in the glass were the ones from the first motel. Same curtains, same wallpaper, even though she had left that place hours ago and driven more than 100 miles. She leaned closer, and her reflection didn't move. It just stared at her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, breathing heavily. Ava whispered, "Were you?" The reflection smiled. Not a human smile. A practice one. Stretched too wide. Held too long. It lifted its hand. Palm toward her. A slow, deliberate wave. She didn't wave back. Instead, she covered the mirror with a towel. But the smile remained, imprinted in her mind like an afterimage burned into her vision. She left the motel that same night. For the next 3 days, she didn't check into any rooms. She slept in her car, woke up with headaches and ringing ears. Her dreams were filled with reflections of herself, all slightly wrong. Some older, some younger, some with missing pieces. No eyes, no mouth, blank smooth skin. Each one whispered the same thing. "You left me there." On the 4th day, she stopped at a gas station, went inside to pay, passed a small mirror behind the counter, tried not to look, but it caught her attention anyway, because her reflection was already staring at her. Before she turned her head, it mouthed a word, "Stay." She backed out of the store, got in the car, drove with shaking hands. That night, she stayed at a motel in the desert, told the clerk she didn't want any mirrors in the room. He laughed nervously. "Sure, I guess. You one of those folks that believes in mirror spirits or something?" She didn't answer. He gave her the key to room 3. Inside, the room was bare. Just a bed, a fan, a single lamp. She double-checked. No mirror. She locked the door, wedged a chair under the knob, turned off the light, laid down, breathed, waited, and at exactly 3:12 a.m., she heard it, a soft scraping sound, like glass sliding across wood. She sat up, turned on the light, and saw the mirror, standing in the corner, glowing faintly. And in the reflection, she was still asleep. Ava stared at the mirror, glowing no canto, du cordo. Her reflection was still lying on the bed, breathing steadily, deeply, like she hadn't woken up yet. But she had. She was on her feet, heart racing, hands trembling, eyes wide open. So who or what was still asleep in that bed? She stepped closer. Each step made the light inside the mirror pulse stronger. Silver ripples moved across the glass, as if it were water held vertically. Then her reflection opened its eyes, slowly, and smiled. Ava stopped. The reflection sat up, not in sync, not delayed. It moved with purpose. It looked around the room in the mirror, a perfect copy of the one Ava was standing in, and then turned to face her directly. It spoke, not aloud, but from inside the glass. Ava didn't hear the words with her ears. She felt them in the base of her skull, in the pit of her stomach. "You're tired?" She didn't respond. "I can take over. Just rest." The reflection stood, and for the first time, Ava noticed something horrifying. The eyes in the mirror weren't hers. Not exactly. They were darker, rimmed with a faint shimmer. Not human. Something had learned how to look like her, but hadn't perfected it. The mouth moved again. "You left me there. I've waited. I've watched. Now it's your turn." The mirror pulsed. Ava stepped back. The air around her grew thick, heavy. The room darkened, not from the lamp, but from inside her mind, like a fog spreading behind her eyes. She stumbled, fell to one knee. The reflection in the mirror stepped forward and didn't stop at the glass. Its hand pressed through, not shattered, but passed into her world like a spoon to the surface of a lake. The hand reached for her face. She tried to move, but she couldn't. Not fast enough. Not anymore. When she woke up, the room was quiet. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains. She sat up slowly, felt calm. Her limbs were heavy, but relaxed, her chest warm. She stood, stretched, walked to the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, perfectly in sync. No delay, no glitches, just her. Ava smiled, and the reflection smiled with her. But on the other side of the mirror, where the light was dim and silver, Ava sat in the bed, screaming. No voice, no sound, only her own reflection staring back at her from a world that wasn't real. A version of her now wearing her life. And every night at 3:12 a.m., the new Ava looks into the mirror and whispers, "Sleep well." Months later, room 217 was occupied again. A man named Jeremy, business traveler, tired, recently grieving, emotionally empty, flight delayed, back ache, recent divorce. All he wanted was a decent night's sleep. The desk clerk offered him the room at the end of the hall. 217, he said. Quieter. The others are taken. Jeremy accepted without a second thought. He wasn't superstitious or curious, just tired. So tired. That night, Jeremy went to bed without turning on the television. He barely noticed the decor, but he noticed the mirror, oval, antique, hanging above the dresser. He thought it was odd that the motel would keep something so old, but he didn't care. He turned off the light. The rain began to fall, and the mirror began to shine. Jeremy turned over in bed, his eyes heavy but restless. He glanced toward the mirror without getting up, just to check. And for a brief second, he thought he saw someone standing behind him, someone the same height, same haircut, but the eyes were those of a woman. He sat up. He turned on the light. The mirror was empty. Just him, just the room. He laughed, too tired. He laid down again. He closed his eyes. In the mirror, Ava watched. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She waited. And that night, Jeremy slept deeply, more deeply than he had ever slept. As he slept, the mirror glowed brighter, quietly, patiently, hungrily. The mirror from room 217 is still there. It never leaves the door. It appears when you are most tired, most vulnerable, most willing to trade your pain for silence. And all it needs is for you to look long enough for the other side to see you too. Story 5, The Candle That Shows What's Hidden. Have you ever been in a room so dark that when you lit a candle, it didn't feel like it pushed the darkness away? It just made the dark more visible, like it wasn't emptiness around you, but something watching, waiting. This story begins with a man named Desmond. Desmond had just inherited the family farmhouse after the death of his grandmother, a place buried in the hills of rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by trees so dense they swallowed sound. He hadn't been there in over 20 years, not since he was a boy, not since the fire, the one that took his sister, the one that no one talked about. He returned not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. His life in the city had unraveled. Job gone, marriage over, bank account dying. He needed a place to stay. The house still stood, brittle and half forgotten, but upright. Inside, it smelled of dust, dried herbs, and something faintly sweet like burnt sugar. His grandmother had been strange, quiet, the kind of woman who kept doors locked from the inside, hung charms on the doorknobs, and said things like, "Don't look through the window after midnight." She left behind few things: a Bible with a lock clasp, a trunk he couldn't open, and on the mantel above the fireplace, a candle. It was thick, dark burgundy, worn down on one side, like it had burned unevenly for years. No wick was visible, no scent, just wax, heavy and cold. He didn't think much of it, not until the first night. The power went out during a thunderstorm. Typical. He searched drawers for a flashlight. Nothing worked. Then he remembered the candle. He picked it up, turned it in his hand. No wick, but as soon as he held it, the flame appeared. A slow, lazy flame. No sound, no heat, just light. It didn't glow like a normal candle. It flickered low, blue, and didn't illuminate the walls. It created shadows where there shouldn't be any. That's when he noticed them. Shapes on the floor, on the ceiling. Figures, not moving, not clear, but there. Outlines of things that looked human, but not quite. Long fingers, tilted heads, no mouths. They stood at the edges of the room, unmoving, watching. He looked away. When he looked back, they were gone. The candle still burned. He tried to blow it out, but it didn't go out. No matter how hard he exhaled, it stayed lit. Only when he dropped it back onto the mantel did the flame vanish, instantly, and the room was dark again. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Desmond searched for answers. He examined the candle. No markings, no wick, just a smooth, waxy surface that felt cold even under direct sunlight. When he held it in the palm of his hand, it pulsed. Not literally. There was no movement, but he felt it, like holding something that was breathing just under the surface. He put it down, walked away, tried to forget it. That night, the power stayed on. Still, the house felt darker than before. Every corner seemed too deep. Every window seemed to hold reflections that didn't match the room. And just past 3 a.m., he heard the sound. Whispers, faint, foreign, not quite language, more like breath shaped into meaning he couldn't understand. He went to the mantel. The candle was gone. He spun around. It was on the kitchen table, sitting upright, unlit. He hadn't moved it. He was alone. He didn't want to touch it again. But the room had changed. The shadows were too still, too tall, and the whispers were getting closer. He reached for the candle, and it lit itself. The figures returned. This time, clearer. They stood in the kitchen doorway, behind the refrigerator, on the ceiling, everywhere the light didn't quite reach. And now they were moving, slowly, jerking in short, silent bursts. Their heads tilted, their fingers outstretched. Their mouths were missing, as if erased or never drawn at all. Desmond held the candle up. "Who are you?" he whispered. One of them turned, and though it had no mouth, the whisper still came. "You see what she kept hidden?" He dropped the candle. It hit the floor, stayed lit. The flame didn't flicker. It grew, turned dark blue, then violet, then black. The room filled with cold. Desmond backed away until he hit the wall. One figure reached toward the flame, long fingers hovering inches above the surface, then vanished, gone, like it had burned away. He picked up the candle. It went out. The figures were gone. But Something new had been left behind. On the floor, beneath where the candle had landed, a burn mark in the shape of a hand. But the fingers were too long, and there were 6 of them. The next morning, Desmond searched the house. Not for ghosts, not for monsters, for explanations. In the back room, tucked behind a wardrobe that hadn't been opened in years, he found a small cedar box. Inside, a bundle of dried lavender, a necklace with a black stone, a folded photograph of his grandmother as a young woman, standing beside a man with no face, not blurred, but missing entirely. And finally, a leather-bound journal. The pages smelled of smoke and wax. The handwriting was clean, careful, full of words he didn't expect to see from the woman he knew. The entries started calmly. I begun using the candle again. It helps me see, not like before, not the way they taught us. This is deeper. Then they gather at the edges, not spirits, not demons, something older. They don't come into the light, but they want to. And then I saw her last night. Not a ghost. Her, my girl, my Ada. She stood behind the oven, smiling, but it wasn't her smile. The flame grew dark. I told it to go out. It didn't. Desmond froze. Ada, his sister, she died in this house, in a fire. Everyone said it was an accident, but here, in her own words, his grandmother was saying she saw her after. The next entry chilled him. The candle doesn't protect. It chooses. It allows. It sees. If I stop lighting it, I can't see her anymore. If I keep lighting it, she gets closer. I am so tired. That night, Desmond lit the candle again. Not because he wanted to, because he had to see her. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, the candle between his knees. The flame flickered, the shadows deepened, and from the kitchen doorway, she appeared. Ada, 10 years old, hair singed, eyes glassy, skin gray like old paper. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, and the room filled with a smell he hadn't known he remembered. Burning cloth, charcoal, wet ash. He whispered, Ada? She nodded, but she didn't smile. Instead, she pointed to the candle, then to herself, then to him. The flame flared blue, and she mouthed, You're next. Desmond didn't sleep after seeing her. Ada, the way she looked, the tilt of her head, the way she moved without sound, it was all wrong. But her eyes, they were exactly the same as they'd been the last time he saw her alive, the night of the fire. He remembered the way she screamed for help in the hallway as smoke filled the house. He remembered the door handle being too hot to touch. He remembered running outside, barefoot, crying for help. But something about that memory had always felt edited, incomplete. And now he began to remember more, the part he'd forgotten. He went back to the journal, searched every page. One entry was dated just a week before the fire. She keeps touching the candle when I'm not looking. She says she hears someone inside the flame. I told her not to touch it again, but she doesn't listen. Last night, she said, the candle showed me Desmond's face, but it wasn't him. I think it's starting over. Another entry followed, just days later. I caught Ada whispering to the dark in her room. She was sitting on the floor, drawing symbols in chalk. She doesn't know what they mean. Neither do I. But the candle was burning on her windowsill. I didn't light it. I've seen this before. When I was a girl, my sister vanished. They said she drowned. But I saw her reflection in the candle days later. tapping on the inside of the glass. I buried that candle. This one found me anyway. Desmond stood in front of the fireplace at night, staring at the mantel. The candle sat there, dark, still, but he felt it, like it was waiting for him to agree. To strike the match without needing one. To let it in, he picked it up, and it lit itself. The shadows gathered quickly this time, and Ada stepped forward again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, deeper in the dark, stood another Desmond. Identical. Same shirt, same hair, same eyes, except his smile was hollow and his skin was slightly burned, charred in places. And when he blinked, soot fell from his lashes. Desmond dropped the candle. It rolled under the table, still burning. Ada raised her hand. The burned Desmond stepped forward, spoke. "You left us, and now we leave you." He reached out, fingers blackened at the tips, and when Desmond backed away, the flame vanished. Everything went dark. Silence. Then footsteps moving upstairs. In the morning, Desmond woke up on the floor. The candle was back on the mantel. His hands were covered in soot, and carved into the wooden floor, beside where he'd been lying, was a single word: trade. The next night, Desmond sat in front of the candle with the journal in his lap. He had read the last page again and again. The candle doesn't show the truth. It shows the space around it, what the world hides, what time forgets, what the soul avoids. It only burns in the hands of those who regret. And below that, written in ink that had bled through the page, to unsee is to become the seen. He didn't know what that meant, but he understood enough. At 3:12 a.m., the candle lit itself. The room dimmed, walls pulsing with cold. Shadows thickened. The figures returned. This time, they stood in a circle around him. Ada, the burned version of himself. A man with no mouth. A woman with no skin on her face. A child with empty eye sockets. None of them moved. They just waited. The candle's flame turned black at the center, and for the first time it began to speak. Not a voice, not words, but images flashing inside Desmond's mind. Ada hiding the candle in her room, her lighting it while he slept, the house catching fire without cause, his grandmother arriving too late, a door opening inside the flame, Ada reaching for it, and Desmond watching it burn, without moving. He remembered now. She had called his name. He had frozen, not from fear, from recognition, because he had seen his own face in the candle just before it caught fire, smiling and turning away. The candle hissed. A small ember floated out of the flame and hovered in the air. It hovered in front of his chest, waiting. He understood. A trade. He could stay. Join the shadows. Free her. Or blow it out. But blowing it out wouldn't make the vision stop. It would only lock them in. He whispered, "I'm sorry," to Ada, to himself. And then he inhaled deeply and exhaled over flame. Darkness. A sudden, suffocating void. No light, no sound, no heat. And then, a single candle on the mantel, lit, burning steady. In the morning, a real estate agent stopped by. The farmhouse had been sold in an estate auction after Desmond disappeared. They found no trace of him, only the journal, a cold, untouched house, and a candle on the mantel, one that never melted. The agent brought their daughter inside, 12 years old, as her mother spoke to the contractor. The girl walked to the mantel, fascinated by the old candle. She picked it up. The flame sparked. lit, and from the dark hallway behind her, a child's voice whispered, "Desmond, Story 6, the portrait that erased me." They say photographs capture a moment in time. But what if the photo keeps changing? What if the moment doesn't want to stay still? And what happens when it decides you no longer belong in it? This is the story of a woman named Erin. She was 33, an archivist, quiet, methodical, and deeply obsessed with preserving the past, which made her the perfect person to inherit her grandfather's massive collection of historical items after he died. His house, located in a rural corner of Maine, was packed with shelves, boxes, and filing cabinets full of letters, records, newspapers, and photos. So many photos. Old ones, cabinet cards, daguerreotypes, family portraits so faded they looked like ghosts even before time had its way with them. She spent the first few weeks sorting, cataloging, scanning, and uploading to an external drive. That's when she found it, tucked in the back of a drawer in the desk. He always kept locked. A portrait, roughly 11 by 14 inches. Sepia tone, ornate brass frame. It showed a group of 8 people standing in front of a large house. 7 adults, 1 child. They wore clothes from the early 1900s. Stiff collars, gloves, wide skirts. Each expression solemn, but clear. She didn't recognize any of them. The back of the photo was blank. She placed it on a side table, intending to research the people in it later. But the next morning, something changed. There were now 7 people in the photo. The child was gone. At first, Erin assumed she had miscounted. Maybe the image had faded more under light. She checked the high-res scan on her computer. The child was there, clear as day. She pulled the physical photo closer. Still gone. She blinked, and something else caught her eye. The position of the adults had shifted slightly, their heads tilted at new angles. One man had turned slightly toward the camera, though he had been facing left before. She rescanned it, compared both files. They weren't the same. And on the second scan, in the background, the windows of the house had darkened. That night, she dreamed of a house with no doors, just halls, endless rooms with wallpaper that peeled like skin, and at the center, hanging above a fireplace, the portrait. But in the dream, she was in it, standing on the far right, expression blank, hands folded. She woke up sweating. The photo lay on her desk, not where she left it. The frame was warm to the touch, and when she looked again, there were now 6 people in the image. By the 3rd morning, Erin avoided looking at the portrait. She left it face down on the desk, a folder placed over it like a paperweight made of denial. But it didn't help, because something else had started changing. Her phone. She went to send a message to her sister and realized she wasn't in her contact list. In fact, there were only a few names there now. No call history, no texts. She checked her email. Most of her archived conversations were gone. She tried logging into her social media. Invalid credentials. Her name didn't bring up any results. Not even old photos. She opened the gallery on her phone. Every photo she had appeared in over the past 10 years, she was gone from them. A birthday party in 2018. Everyone smiling, arms around nothing where she should be. A vacation in 2020. The beach chair beside her friend's umbrella was empty. Her apartment, her dog, her ex, all there. Only she was missing. And in some of the older photos, where she once remembered smiling clearly, she can now see something else. A faint shadow where her outline used to be. like a stain burned into the moment where she no longer belonged. That night, she flipped the portrait back over. Now only 5 people remained, and one of them, a woman in a wide skirt with lace gloves, now wore Erin's face. Not perfectly, but enough. Same jawline, same lips, eyes duller. She stared at it for a long time, and then whispered, "What are you doing to me?" The candle on her desk flickered. No wind, no draft, just a single trembling flame. And then the room filled with a sound like distant photographic flashes, hundreds of shutters clicking at once. Her laptop screen blinked. The photo of the portrait opened on its own. It was updating. Live, the woman wearing her face began to smile. Erin backed away from the desk. She ran to the bathroom, stared into the mirror. At first, everything looked normal, but then her face took longer to react. She blinked. Her reflection hesitated. She waved her hand. The reflection waved back, but with the wrong hand. And for a split second, her eyes looked at her with recognition, as if from the other side of the glass. She screamed, turned off the light. The reflection didn't go away. It just kept watching. Erin didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk with the portrait covered, her laptop open, trying to find herself. Her name returned no results. Her articles, her thesis, her published records, all gone. Even the college where she'd worked had no listing for her. Her ID number had been archived under inactive, no record of hire. The only trace she found was a single blog post from 2014, a blurry group photo from a conference. The caption read, "Me and the team from the archives." One of them asked not to be tagged. Haha. The person beside the woman taking the selfie had no face. Not blurred, just blank space. Like the outline of a person was there, but nothing filled it. Desperate, Erin returned to her grandfather's filing cabinets. She dug through folders, old letters, envelopes, then something strange, an unlabeled manila envelope. Inside, a list of names, a hand-drawn sketch of the portrait she'd found, only with different faces. A single page with one sentence repeated over and over, "They stand where we once belonged." On the back of the page, written in her grandfather's distinct handwriting, "Every 20 years, it changes. One disappears. One takes their place. It doesn't choose at random." At the bottom of the list, 3 names had been crossed out. Next to the 4th, her name, Erin Margaret Calloway. No line through it. Not yet. She checked the names above hers. One, Luther G. Clark, was listed as removed 1982. She searched the name. Nothing. Not even a death certificate. But a local newspaper archive had one article. Man reported missing in rural Maine. Investigation stalled after no evidence of entry or exit. The article included a photo of Luther, a man in his late 20s. Familiar. She ran back to the portrait. There he was, second from the left. No longer there in the current version, but there in her first scan. He had been replaced, like the others, just as she was being replaced. That night, she left the portrait face down again. But the next morning, she found it hung on the wall, centered perfectly. And now, only 4 people remained. The woman who wore her face was smiling wider. And the house behind them? It was no longer faded and distant. It was her grandfather's house. Erin couldn't explain how the portrait had mounted itself on the wall. There were no nails, no wires, no marks of movement. And yet there it was, centered above the fireplace, perfectly level, as if it had always been there. She tried to take it down, but when her fingers touched the frame, her skin tingled, like static, like touching an old TV screen left on too long. She flinched, then looked again. The portrait had changed again. Now only 3 people remained. But something else was different. Something she hadn't noticed until now. The remaining figures were sharpening, their details becoming clearer. The woman with Aaron's face now wore a modern jacket, boots like the ones Aaron kept by the back door, a scar on her knuckle, just like the one Aaron had since childhood. And the other 2, they were watching her, no longer staring straight ahead like before. Now their eyes were turned slightly toward her, tracking her, studying, waiting. That night, she heard footsteps, but not from upstairs. Inside the walls, shuffling, dragging, moving from room to room, slow and deliberate. The house groaned as if under pressure. She ran to the front door. It wouldn't open, not stuck, just wouldn't respond. She turned the knob. It spun freely, like it wasn't connected to anything. The windows showed only blackness outside. Not night, just absence. No trees, no stars, no light, as if the house now existed inside the photograph itself. She ran back to the living room. The portrait glowed softly, a dim, sepia shimmer pulsing through the frame. The floor beneath it was warm. She dropped to her knees and heard something, a heartbeat, not hers, slow, steady, heavy, coming from inside the wall. She pressed her ear to the floorboards. A voice came through, her own voice, but older, softer, saying, "You're already here." She stood, backed away, but the room stretched. The hallway behind her lengthened by feet, then meters, then impossible space. She turned to run, but the hallway looped back to the living room. The portrait now covered the entire wall, and in it only 2 people remained. One was her. The other was just a shadow. No face, no details, just a silhouette. But it was holding her hand. Aaron stood frozen. The portrait, now the size of an entire wall, pulsed like a living thing. The 2 remaining figures inside it were no longer still. They moved. Their hands shifted. Their heads tilted toward one another. And the shadow figure, the one holding her hand, began to fill in. First the outline, then a faint face, eyes like mirrors, a mouth not smiling, not frowning, just open, as if whispering something no one could hear. Aaron backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Every doorway led back to the portrait. Every hallway looped into itself. Even the stairs dissolved into blank walls. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a frame. She turned to run, but her feet no longer felt solid. They barely made sound, like she was lighter now, fainter. She reached for her phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen didn't respond. It was blank, not black, white, empty. Her reflection in the screen blinked, but she hadn't. She ran to the mirror in the bathroom. She wasn't there. The room reflected perfectly, but she was missing, not invisible, just absent, like the mirror no longer knew who to copy. She tried to scream. No sound. Her voice had gone first. Back in the living room, the portrait flickered. Now only one person remained, and it was no longer Aaron. The woman in the photo looked like her, but the eyes were different, calmer, satisfied. The shadow was gone, and the house behind her once old and faded, now looked restored. Clean windows, new paint, like time had restarted, but without Aaron in it. The next day, a realtor arrived at the Calloway property. The house had sat empty for years. No known heirs. No official record of the last occupant. The neighbors barely remembered anyone ever living there. "It's strange," the agent said, flipping through her clipboard. "There's no history on this place." The front door creaked open. Dust coated everything, except for one item. A single portrait on the wall, sepia-toned, framed in antique brass. One woman standing in front of the house, alone, calm, unmoving. The agent stared at it for a moment, felt like she'd seen the woman before, but couldn't remember her name, or where they'd met, or if they had met at all. She turned away. The flame-shaped glow inside the portrait dimmed, and somewhere far beyond the frame, in halls without doors and mirrors without reflection, Aaron stood silently among hundreds of portraits, all of them watching, all of them waiting.